Hello YouTubers. Alright, as promised we're going to talk about China, communist China, mainly Mao's China, Mao Zedong's China from 1949 until his death, and kind of what China has done with communism since then. It's been different than what's done with communism in a lot of other places. So we're going to focus on, first of all, how Mao first gained popular support from the peasantry, then toppled the elites and kind of the intellectuals in China, and the Great Leap Forward in China, which was a industrial economic goal to advance China. Then the rise of the Pragmatists, and we'll talk about the Cultural Revolution in China, and then kind of the re-rise of the Pragmatists. So first of all, how did Mao gain power and support to begin with in China? And really, the way that Mao was able to gain support was to latch on to what the peasants saw, and the poor farmers. When I say peasants, I'm mainly talking about poor farmers here. How the peasants viewed leadership. And so China had just gone through this 100 years of embarrassment, this 100 years of humiliation, where ever since the Opium War they'd been controlled by outside forces. First Britain, then different powers carving up parts of China for spheres of influence, and finally Japan conquering into China during World War II. So now China's finally free, and Mao attempts to paint China as the victim and needing to get back on their feet, and the West and capitalism and democracy as kind of the enemy, the people who had invaded them and taken over. And so he was really quickly able to paint the intellectuals and elites in China as Western. Those who were being educated were kind of the bad guys because they were on the side of those people who had invaded and taken over China for so long. And so he was able to kind of quickly get them out of power by claiming that they were part of the reason that China had gone through this humiliation. So he asked kind of to get some ideas for how China should get going. He asked these elites to offer their ideas, and when they did offer their ideas, and many of them were very ardent about changing things, communist things in communist China, he was able to get rid of them or imprison them or silence them, and therefore was able to grab control for himself. His economic goal was kind of laid out in the Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was supposed to be a program of economic advancement in which he would rely on the peasants to do kind of mini industrialism on a small scale, build backyard furnaces and create industrial power that way. Minor industrial powers all put together into a major industrial power. This mostly failed. The backyard furnaces and the industrialism that he had in mind was not able to be that he envisioned did not actually come true. None of this really came to be. Instead, a lot of the peasants went hungry. They produced really horrible industrial goods. Their metal that they produced was nothing that anybody would want, and so he had to realize that this was a major failure. And even though he was still incredibly popular with the people, he had to give way to his advisors, his political advisors, who would be the pragmatists. So a pragmatist is somebody who tries to create function. They basically, practicality is the way of life for a pragmatist. They look at something and they say, well, is it practical or not? And so a lot of these advisors had to tell Mao, this isn't practical, this isn't what we need to do. And so the pragmatists started to take power, and this included Zhou Enlai, Liu Shaoqi, and then probably the most famous of them, Deng Xiaoping, who would later become the leader of China after Mao died. So the pragmatists were able to be his advisors, and they really took the front seat when it came to like revitalizing Chinese economy and society after the failure of the Great Leap Forward. So Mao was still seen as the people's hero, and he was still in power. And after a while, was kind of deeply resenting the power of the pragmatists, and so he launched what was called the Cultural Revolution. Now, the Cultural Revolution was really led by students, Mao's communist students, who went forth and basically tried to purge Chinese society of any intellectual or elite type powers. And remember, these intellectuals and elites were being compared to the West, and so because they were educated and had these Western ideas, they were considered anti-communist. And so these protests went around. The Red Guard, the communist army, went through and arrested any kind of elite or intellectual and got rid of them, put them in prison, killed them. Many of the pragmatists were jailed or killed, and Mao kind of took a seat of power again. He was attempting to improve society and culture within China through communist ways. He died in 1973, and ever since his death, and really even before his death, the pragmatists have again risen to power in China. And so, as a result of this, China maintains communism as their main governmental power, one party in charge of the entire country, and opposition to the party really not necessarily being illegal, but being very tightly monitored and controlled. But they have not maintained all aspects of communism. So communism is supposed to be highly authoritarian, it's supposed to be a strong welfare state, it's supposed to create no private industry and kind of shared resources. And China has kind of kept a lot of the political aspects of communism by having this one-party control and a very authoritarian leadership style, but tight controls on people's freedoms. But there has been economic reform, which has made China a little bit more like the West, a little more capitalistic. They've allowed for private business and industry. They don't always provide welfare to everybody in the country. And so Chinese communism has really changed from what the idea of communism was into something that's very distinctly Chinese. And so it's difficult to call Chinese communism because it's really kind of the Chinese idea of communism now. And it's really, a lot of that is in part because the pragmatists realized this isn't going to work for us if we rely strictly on communistic models of economy. And it didn't work for the USSR, and they collapsed. And it has worked for China, and they're still going with a lot of these Western economic reforms. All right, so that's China. I'll come back in another video and talk a little bit about Vietnam, but I think this is good for this one. So be awesome. I'll see you later.